Welcome back, everybody. It's a new week of reading. I'm here, Valerie Monroe, with my good friend, Bookwormy, and we are here to read more of the book called Down the Swale. You will really like it. Well, we're just getting to a really good part. Brogden has been out on Sunset Island with John and Elaine. And do you remember in the middle of the night, he was woken up by a humming, yumming sound? And we found out it was Maggie, the lock creature. But don't worry, even though she looks fierce, she's really very nice. That's right. Maggie has been hidden in a tank in John and Elaine's basement. And Brogden learned all about her in the last chapter. So we're going to pick up, let's see, on chapter 10. Remember, they had all decided it was time for a good night's sleep. Brogden slept fitfully in the guest room. That means he wasn't having a good night's sleep. In his dreams, he was sitting next to the tank singing a song while Maggie turned somersaults in the water. With every flip and swish of her tail, Maggie would smile and Brogden would reward her with the orange, shrimpy smelling pellets. He wasn't a foot tall in his dream. He was the same height as John. So it was easy for him to reach over the top of the tank and feed Maggie right out of the palm of his hand. John and Elaine, meanwhile, were floating around the tank in their sailboat. John was eating an enormous ice cream cone with sour cream on top, and they were both smiling and laughing. It's a pretty wacky dream, isn't it? And then the dream abruptly changed. A giant frog appeared in the tank, croaking, "Danger! Danger!" Dozens of fish of all kinds surrounded Maggie with bubbles coming out of their mouths. The bubbles rose to the surface, and as they popped, all Brogden could hear was, "Monster! Monster!" Poor Maggie became paralyzed as the fish surrounded her, moving closer and closer. Her eyes sought out Brogden's through the tank's window, imploring him to help her. But the more she needed him, the shorter he shrank. He was forced to watch helplessly as fishermen with nets and poles and long-handled knives banged on the grate, shouting, "Get her! Get her!" "What should we do?" Elaine and John called to him. Brogden looked around. He had nothing to defend Maggie with. The only thing in the room was a white plastic container, and when he opened it, he was dismayed to see that it was filled with more sour cream. "How?" he cried out. "Throw the sour cream! Throw the sour cream!" John and Elaine screamed together. Brogden grabbed the container, but he knew he was too short to throw it into the tank. He couldn't reach. "Throw it! Throw it!" They were all chanting this. John and Elaine, Maggie, the frog, the fish, even the fisherman. The heron reappeared, soaring above them with its giant beak opening and closing as it squawked, "Brogden! Throw the sour cream!" "I can't," Brogden sobbed. "I can't." A pair of hands was shaking him gently as a voice called him. "It's just a dream, Brogden. It's just a dream." Whew, he opened his eyes to find John and Elaine standing over him, their faces filled with concern. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. Sunlight was streaming through the window. He blinked his eyes several times and gazed slowly around. And then it all came flooding back to him. He was in a house on Sunset Island, in the middle of Lake Wahakmo, and a magnificent sea creature named Maggie was swimming in a tank in a secret room below the basement. "Good morning, sleepyhead," John smiled, tousling Brogden's long hair. Brogden felt embarrassed when he realized they had probably heard him cry out in his sleep. "Yes, I was having a bad dream," he said sheepishly. "Is Maggie okay?" "She's better than okay," Elaine reassured him. "In fact, she's already eaten her breakfast. Would you like to go see her after you've eaten yours?" Brogden couldn't think of anything else he'd rather do, and he said exactly this. Elaine disappeared for a moment, then returned with a gleaming silver tray. It held a plate stacked high with steaming slices of a yellowy-looking bread, a tall and frosty glass of orange juice, and a fresh napkin. He thought everything looked and smelled delicious, and he was eager to try out new house dweller food. French toast, said Elaine. I think you'll like it better with butter and syrup. I always do. I don't know if you guys like French toast, but I love French toast, and that's why I put it in the book. Oh, thank you, Brogden replied, touched by their kindness. He'd never had breakfast in bed before. Sure enough, he did like the food. The butter had melted into golden pools between the slices, and Elaine poured warm syrup over the whole stack before cutting the slices into bite-sized pieces. Oh, the combination of the melting butter and the warm syrup filled his tummy. And he found he liked it even better than the chili and the ice cream from the night before. The outside of the French toast was crispy, and the inside was soft and squishy, and he savored each bite. Elaine and John sat at the foot of the bed, watching contentedly while Brogden ate. He was enjoying it so much that he said very little, just chewed and swallowed, chewed and swallowed. He polished off the final piece of French toast and drained the orange juice from the glass, tipping it back until it was empty. And then, without meaning to, he let out a ripping great burp. Oh, excuse me, Brogden apologized, blushing. Even though John and Elaine were laughing out loud, it was all just so delicious. He dabbed at his mouth with the napkin. Oh, it's quite all right, Elaine said. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Would you care for some more? No, thank you. Brogden patted his tummy. I'm so full. Secretly, he was thinking that if he spent any more time eating with the house dwellers, perhaps he'd grow to more than a foot tall. Can we go and see Maggie now? Oh, I think Maggie would enjoy that, John said. But first things first, Elaine cut in, handing Brogden his own clothes, which she had washed and dried. They smelled clean and fresh and slightly lemony. John and Elaine left him to change. After he emerged in the hallway, they headed down to see Maggie. John offered to carry Brogden down the staircase, and the ache in his ribs from his late night slides convinced him to accept the offer. The basement didn't seem half as ominous as it had in the middle of the night. John set him down in front of the tiny door behind the bureau while he removed a key that hung from a black cord, probably something very tiny, like this. It was around his neck. I never take it off except to undo the lock, he said to Brogden. I even sleep with it. There's only one key to this room, one other one, and it's hidden. The lock clicked open, and the door swung aside on its hinges. The lake smell, cool and fishy, greeted them as John hunkered down to get through the low opening. Brogden, on the other hand, stepped through easily and then followed John down the stairs to the room with the tank. Maggie was swimming in circles underneath the water, her undulations creating waves that looked like a string of hills and valleys. But when she heard them approaching, she swam up to the front of the tank, lifted her head, and flashed a toothy grin. Although John had said Maggie was harmless, Brogden was still awed by the sight of her scales, her teeth, her tail. John reached into his pocket and pulled out a small green pellet. Here you go. Toss this in, he said, handing it to Brogden. What is it? Brogden asked, turning it over in between his fingers. He brought it to his nose and sniffed. Didn't smell like the other pellets. A vitamin, John said. Because Maggie is not growing up in Loch Morar, she is missing some of the nutrients that she would get from the plants there. This vitamin is made from plants in Loch Morar. Brogden threw the pellet high into the air and up over the tank, and in a wink, Maggie snatched it up. She looked inquisitively at John as if to say, was there any more? That's it for today, Maggie girl, he said, and then to Brogden, too many of those can make her homesick for Loch Morar and Morag. Remember, Morag is her mother. Will she ever be able to return to Loch Morar? Brogden asked. Will she ever be able to see Morag again? He and John sat down together on the bench and watched Maggie swim. Maybe in time, John said. Right now she can't defend herself against predators. And if Morag was slowed down because she was trying to protect Maggie, we'd run the possibility of losing both of them. And then he added, for now, this is the only solution. Brogden thought about how he was like Maggie, how they were both far from home. And sensing this, John put his hand lightly on his shoulder. As much as we would like to have you stay here as our guest for a few days, as sort of a holiday, we should think about getting you home. I'm sure your aunts will be so glad to see you. Maggie slithered along the bottom of the tank and blew bubbles through her large nostrils. You will always be welcome here, John added. Brogden smiled and nodded in agreement. If he didn't believe that his aunts weren't crying their eyes out right now, he would have no problem staying on for a few days. But the sooner he was able to let them know he was safe and sound, the better. Then he said what had been on his mind since his conversation with John and Elaine in the middle of the night. You can trust me, Brogden said earnestly. I swear, I won't tell anyone about Maggie being here. He paused. Ever. Why, I never thought you would, replied John. Now say a goodbye to Maggie and we'll go look at my maps to see if we can figure out where you belong. Brogden walked up to the tank and Maggie swam over to see him. Their faces were very close, separated only by the glass. He raised his hand to wave and Maggie raised her tail. It plopped down with a mighty splash and drenched the top of Brogden's head. He laughed heartily and shook his hair from side to side, flinging the water droplets everywhere. Goodbye, Maggie, he whispered softly. I wish I could stay here longer and get to know you. But, well, you see, I have to get back to my home by the Swale. I have to let my aunts know that I'm safe. And you, stay safe too, Maggie, he choked. Maybe someday I'll come back and... His words trailed off. He stared hard at her, trying to memorize exactly what she looked like. The length of her neck, the curves of her back, the way the light played upon her scales. He felt certain that as long as he lived, he would never witness such an incredible creature again. She gazed back at him and then lowered her lashes and swam off toward the back of the tank where she began turning somersaults. Brogden stole one last look at her before turning away and starting up the stairs behind John. Maggie is certainly an incredible creature, isn't she? And we'll tune in tomorrow to see if John is able to find the right road to take to get Brogden back to his aunts. That was such a sad part of the story. Why are you crying? I'm just a little sad. Why are you sad? He had to say goodbye to Maggie. Well, he can't stay there forever. His aunts are worried about him. That's true. Please tune in tomorrow to read more of Down the Swale with us. We'll be waiting for you.